Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining into the third 2023 Active Transportation Program Workshop. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes and to let people log on, and then I will come back on. Okay, I think we'll get started now. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for participating in today's 2023 Active Transportation Program Workshop. My name is Lori Waters, and I am the Program Manager for the Active Transportation Program at the California Transportation Commission. Today's workshop focus is a little bit different. What we're going to talk about is what it means for an ATP application to be a project study report equivalent as required in the ATP guidelines. This is very important for the program, so I'm happy that we have great participation today. We had a similar workshop last cycle, and it was very well received, so we're doing it again this cycle, and we actually are holding this workshop earlier in the process to help applicants as they put together their applications. Just to remind everyone, starting last cycle, we started scoring on scope and plan consistency on all the 5 different types of applications. And we found by doing this, we definitely had the best applications in terms of PSR equivalency last cycle. And this will hopefully lead to successfully delivered projects. Today's workshop will be led by members of the Caltrans Local Assistance ATP team, Summer Lopez, Desiree Fox, Trina Liu, and Emily Abrahams. They're all going to do a portion of the presentation today. We hope that you find this workshop very informative and that you ask a lot of questions. This is a great opportunity for you to get help directly from these technical experts. So please utilize their help today. We'll also post this workshop as a YouTube video after the workshop so you can refer back to it later. Before we turn the workshop over to the Caltrans staff, Alika Changizi will review how to participate through the GoTo webinar. Alika?
Thank you, Lori. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 Active Transportation Program PSR Equivalent Workshop. Our workshops normally take place in different locations around the state. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical changes. The workshop agenda and discussion handouts are located under the Handouts tab and can be downloaded and saved throughout this webinar. These will also be uploaded on the Commission's Active Transportation Program website. For participants joining us through GoToWebinar, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio, questions, and the handouts tabs. Under the audio tab, you have a choice to listen in via computer or telephone option. If you prefer computer audio, please select the appropriate box. If you prefer phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access this webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. We welcome comments and questions from attendees as part of each topic this workshop. There will be an opportunity for comments and questions throughout and at the end of the presentation. There are two options for participants to provide comments. You may click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make said comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Also, please use the hand raised feature as early into the topic as you can to give the system enough time to acknowledge you. You may also use the questions tab and submit questions or comments. Please type the topic you are commenting on and your comment. I will read this on your behalf. Thank you again for joining us today, and we appreciate you sharing your time and feedback with us. And with that, I will hand it over to Caltrans staff.
Thank you so much, Alika and Lori. We're all very excited to be here today. So I would like to welcome everybody to our Active Transportation Program 2023 Cycle 6 Project Study Report Equivalent Workshop, also known as the PSR Equivalent Workshop. My name is Summer Lopez. I assist in managing non-infrastructure and plan project types through the Active Transportation Program at Caltrans headquarters. And I also assist in managing an ATP-funded project called the Active Transportation Resource Center, which we will talk about later today. I am joined by some of my colleagues who I will hand over to them to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Desiree Fox. I'm the Active Transportation Program Manager for Infrastructure Projects for the northern half of the state. That's districts 1 through 5 and 10.
Hello, good afternoon. I am Emily Abrahams, and I am the Program Manager for the Non-Infrastructure and Plan project types, and also the Active Transportation Resource Center.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Trina Luo. I'm the ATP Program Manager for the South District, the District 6 to 9 and 11, 12. Back to you, Summer.
Thank you so much. So today we will be going over some ATP background information. We'll be talking about the PSR equivalence purpose, definition, and requirements. We'll go over the engineer's checklist in detail, discuss the PSR equivalent for non-infrastructure and plans. We'll provide some takeaways, wrap up, and finally finish with some resources, tools, and training that you can access through the Active Transportation Resource Center. The Active Transportation Program began in 2013 and is a $440+ million program that funds projects that benefit biking, walking, and all other non-motorized rolling. The goals of the program are to increase the proportion of trips accomplished by walking and biking, to increase the safety and mobility of non-motorized users, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, enhance public health, ensure that disadvantaged communities fully share in the benefit of the program, and to provide a broad spectrum of projects that benefit many types of active transportation users. There are 5 basic eligible project types, and they are all meant to further the program goals. The first, infrastructure, are long-term capital projects. Second, non-infrastructure projects, which are education and encouragement activities. Plans, which are developments of community-wide bicycle, pedestrian, safe routes to school, or other active transportation plans that benefit disadvantaged communities. The fourth is a combination project, which are infrastructure and non-infrastructure combined. And finally, quick build pilot projects, which are interim capital projects that are built with durable, low-cost materials and last 1 to 5 years. There are 6 application types for the ATP, and these are defined by the current guidelines. Please note that some of these details may change for this cycle after the guideline workshops are complete. The first 3 application types are infrastructure-only applications. The first is for small infrastructure, which are projects that cost less than $2 million. The second is medium infrastructure, which are projects that are between $2 and $7 million. And the third is large infrastructure, which is projects that have a greater cost than $7 million. The fourth application type is non-infrastructure, which can be any cost and can be either a standalone project or combined with an infrastructure project. Please note that there are combination project-specific applications that must be used when applying for a combo project. The infrastructure component of a combo project application is also gauged on whether or not it is small, medium, or large infrastructure. So please use the appropriate application. The fifth application type is for plans, which can also be any cost, but must be a standalone project and cannot be combined with any other project type. Finally, the last application type is for the quick build pilot. Quick build pilot projects can be any cost and are considered an infrastructure project. These projects must be standalone, meaning that they cannot be combined with any other application type. Because quick build projects are currently a pilot, details in the application and guideline requirements around quick builds may change. And now I will pass it to Desiree.
Hi. So we wanted to answer the question that should come to everyone's mind, which is essentially, what is the purpose of the workshop? Next slide, please. Why do we need a PSR equivalent? The first thing we want everyone to understand is that the application serves as the PSR equivalent, and the scope in the application is the approved scope when the project is programmed after it's selected to receive funding. The project that's scored high enough to receive funding is the project that is expected to be delivered. And one of our jobs at Caltrans is to verify that you build what you presented in your application. The PSR equivalent is also necessary to verify the scope, schedule, and estimated costs as shown in the application, and also to verify the deliverability and constructability of the project. We review the project to see if the proposed costs and schedule are reasonable to deliver the project successfully. We also verify that the application can be built in the existing environment, or if there are any major changes needed to the existing environment, that it's reflected in the plan's cost and schedule. And also note that the ATP guidelines state that a new infrastructure project will not be programmed without a PSR equivalent. Next slide. Note that we don't require the amount of detail to the extent of a typical Caltrans PSR. We just require enough information be provided to enable us to verify that what is proposed is consistent with the narrative questions as evaluated and scored in the application. We simply want applicants to show what and where the project elements are being proposed. Next slide. PSR equivalents also reduce the need for time extensions, amendments, and project failures. The ATP program follows the timely use of funds guidelines, and untimely delivery can lead to project failures. This slide shows some of the trends with time extensions and amendments, and that can be very time consuming for staff, not only at Caltrans and CTC, but for the implementing agency as well. So here are some statistics and trends for the ATP programmed projects. We have a total of 958 projects that have been programmed in the ATP. 567 of those projects are active and 355 projects are completed. But of those projects, about 38 phases totaling $27 million have lapsed, meaning the funds in 38 phases of various projects were not allocated on time. And 30 projects totaling 32 million were canceled. And then there are about 6 remaining projects that were either segmented into separate projects or the entire project lapsed due to not meeting the timely use of funds deadlines. The number of time extensions showing were from multiple phases. So far, there have been 276 time extensions from cycle 1, 213 from cycle 2, 201 from cycle 3 and counting, 55 from cycle 4, and 3 from cycle 5. Projects from cycles 1 and 2 should be wrapping up, or a few might still be entering the construction phase soon given the pandemic. There are currently 87 minor scope changes and 10 major scope changes that have been approved, and 3 total scope changes that have been declined, and 15 scope changes that have been withdrawn, but still require significant staff time from multiple agencies prior to withdrawal. Next slide. The next logical question would be, what is a PSR equivalent? And so we want to do our part by properly presenting the expectations of a PSR equivalent by defining it and detailing the requirements. Next slide. A PSR equivalent is an engineering report used to document agreement on the scope, cost, and schedule of a project to be included in a future programming document. Again, the ATP guidelines state that an infrastructure project will not be programmed without a PSR equivalent. Also note that a feasibility study is not an appropriate programming document for an infrastructure project. The scope must be defined. Next slide, please. According to the PSR guidelines, a PSR equivalent must include the following: the narrative portion, which includes the need and purpose, the project background and history, and discussion of alternative solutions. The cost and schedule, which includes the project cost for each phase of the project and when those phases will begin, which starts the clock as to when the funds need to be used. The PPR, or project programming request, is the programming document that shows this information. And additionally, the supporting documents, such as the maps, plans, and cross-sections that support the project description, are equally as important. Next slide. So those 3 larger headings or items that were mentioned in the previous slide also need to be consistent with one another. The scope and the narrative must be consistent with the maps and plans and support what is found in the costs and schedule. When those items are not consistent, it's difficult for us to verify the intended project scope. Next slide. Additionally, the PSR guidelines state that a PSR equivalent must consider consistency with statewide, regional, and local planning, and also consider potential environmental issues, including environmental mitigation requirements and hazardous waste. Next slide. This is where the PSR equivalent elements are found in the application, these items. In Part A of the application, you provide the agency information, the project description, project details, including the outputs and outcomes that will show your CalSmart report in your CalSmart reporting, and the project schedule and funding. Part B of the application is where the narrative questions are located, which is question 3, that includes the crash safety data, collision maps, and countermeasures, which highlight the safety need for the project. And Part C of the application includes the attachments, where the remaining PSR equivalent documents will be uploaded. The engineer's checklist is attachment B, which we will highlight in great detail throughout most of the rest of this presentation. Attachment C is the project location map. D includes the project layouts and plans, and also the cross sections, which should show existing and proposed conditions. F is the project estimate, and additional information can be added to attachment K, such as the warrant studies and guidance when needed if a project is adding a traffic signal or additional narration and documentation. The items highlighted in yellow on the slide are all found in the engineer's checklist, which we will discuss next in great detail. Next slide. So I wanted to pause for any questions if we have any.
I haven't seen any questions that have come in.
Okay. Moving on, next slide. Okay, so first we'll provide an overview of the engineer's checklist, and then we'll go into greater detail of the checklist items and requirements, along with some of examples of what to do and what to steer clear of. Next slide. So once again, the engineer's checklist is attachment B of the application. This is where you will find what needs to be provided in the application in detail that will enable you to prepare the application to a PSR equivalent standard. The engineer's checklist needs to be signed and stamped sorry, by the registered professional engineer in responsible charge of the project. That engineer needs to ensure that the PSR equivalent elements in the checklist are indeed included in the application, and that the application is free of critical errors and omissions so that the project can be scored accurately. Next slide. And this is the list of items in the checklist that the PE needs to ensure are included in the application and attachments. And we are going to discuss each item in detail. The titles of the documents are a little different than the older version and the version that was, which is the version that was posted, because we plan to change it to these titles shown to align more with the application. So I'm going to turn it over to Trina to discuss the first items on the checklist.
Thank you, Desiree. Good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Now we are going to review some samples to help you understand more about the PSR requirements. The project location map is to provide the project location. This is the answer to where is the project? Project location map is in the engineer's checklist, attachment C. The project limits must be clearly shown on the location map. In addition, suggest showing state, local jurisdiction, and the project boundary on the location map. We will discuss a couple good examples in next several slides. Next slide, please. The project location map must clearly depict in relationship to the overall agency boundary. And if the project extends outside of the applicant's boundary, the application must include a letter of agreement or MOU from the other agency or agencies. The location map on this slide is a good example. It has the state map, local jurisdiction, and the project location. From this location map, you can tell where the project will be constructed. Next slide, please. This is an example with good graphic and the needed information for a location map. One thing can be improved is to make the project line bolder and solid. So the proposed scope boundary is easier to identify. Next slide, please. This slide shows some portion of the improvements are within Caltrans right-of-way. Depends on the level of impact to Caltrans right-of-way. The cost and the time needed for Caltrans actions varies. So if the proposed work will impact Caltrans right-of-way or state highway system, suggest checking with Caltrans district when preparing the schedule and the cost estimate. Next slide, please. This is something we do not want to see. This location map contains too many lines and too much information. Cannot tell where the project is located and what is the project boundary. So it does not serve the purpose of a location map. Next slide, please. A good project location map will help the reviewer to cross-check the different parts of the application. Please use clear maps and clearly show project limits or boundaries, because in the past, the location maps in some applications are ineligible, and it is hard to tell where the project will be constructed. Next slide, please. The project layout plan is to provide the actual proposed scope, the answer to what will be constructed. Project layout plan is in the engineer's checklist, attachment D. Next slide, please. Generally speaking, to be PSR equivalent, the project layout plan needs to include the existing conditions and all proposed features, and also need to include a scale and a north arrow. In addition, the project layout plan also needs to show the existing right-of-way and the proposed right-of-way lines. Even the proposed right-of-way lines is temporary. For project primary elements, the layout plan also needs to provide the visual limits or boundaries. So the reviewer will know where the elements start and where the elements will end. Next slide, please. The project layout plan is to show the proposed scope. A rule of thumb, using the layout plan, can you determine what elements are being proposed and where? If yes, the layout plan is good. We will discuss a couple good examples in next several slides. Next slide, please. For a simple project, to clearly determine the full scope of the project, colored lines and symbols that show what is being proposed and what side of the road it will be on is adequate. Here are two good examples. The upper one is a good one, clearly show the proposed work, right of lines, and a cross-section. The lower one clearly shows the proposed work also, except it needs a cross-section and a right-of-way lines. Next slide, please. Typically, the more ATP funds that are being requested, the more application effort or detail is expected. This plan shows the cross-sections of a proposed Class 1 bike path. From the plan and the cross-sections, you can tell the relationship between the proposed bike path and the railroads, as well as the US Highway 101. So this is a good project layout plan and the cross-sections. This layout plan and the cross-sections also tells us the project will need to work with railroad and Caltrans because the improvements encroached into railroad right-of-way and the Caltrans right-of-way. So if the applicant is aware of this need, they will consider it when preparing the schedule and the cost estimate. Next slide, please. The project layout plan shown on this slide is something we do not recommend because first, there are so many colorful lines and some of the colors are very similar. The green line looks like the same to the turquoise line. Second, some of the proposed work are not included in this application. So those items need to be dropped out and not mentioned. Another reason is the lighting improvements are shown in an orange line. If a project proposes to install lighting or plant trees, show individual lighting locations or tree locations, unless the cost estimate itemize the numbers. Next slide, please. This is an example for project needs field check. For the project layout, from the project layout plan, looks fine to install the sidewalk and construct the driveway, but the actual field condition does not allow an ADA compliant sidewalk to be installed at the driveway. Since ATP does not fund non-compliant facilities, if there are geometric constraints, verifications are needed to show the proposed work will fit into the existing condition. Next slide, please. This is an example with issues. The application proposes to improve sidewalks throughout 5 blocks. The so-called 30% level project layout plans are actually just some photos. And based on the photos, after the implement's done, the property owner might not get to use the garage and needs to be compensated for this loss. But from the attached cost estimate, if you see here, the proposed right-of-way cost is $2,000 and the overall project cost is $697,000. To compensate the garage owner and to complete the 5-block sidewalk improvements, the proposed cost seems too low. If that is the case, local agency will need to come up with some funds other than ATP funds to cover the project cost overrun, because ATP does not fund cost increase. Next slide, please. From the past several cycles, we do have some lessons learned we'd like to share. Some scope changes are due to inaccurate quantities and math errors. So on the project layout plan, the applicants needs to clearly identify crosswalk types, new crosswalk or enhanced existing. Clearly identify crosswalk locations and lengths. This will help to quantify the crosswalk numbers and minimize the math errors. Clearly identify the location of trees and lightings. Clearly identify the types of bike facilities, class 1, 2, or 3, and the limits. For class 2 and class 4 bike facilities, which side of the road are they located on? One side or both sides? Because the cost and the lengths will be quite different. Clearly identify curb ramp types, new curb ramp or enhanced existing. Clearly identify curb ramp locations and curb extension locations. The last one, but not the least one, is to clearly show the project limits. Label all main streets, show entire project limits. If the application has multiple locations, prepare a layout plan for each location. Next slide, please. An accurate cross-section is needed to confirm right-of-way needs, retaining wall needs, and or identify the project drainage issues. The cross-section is in the engineer's checklist, attachment D. Next slide, please. To be PSR equivalent, the cross-sections need to include existing and proposed conditions. Also need to contain dimensions such as lane width, sidewalk width, right-of-way lines, and side slopes, etc. Include both the width and the depth or thickness for new pavement. In addition, where the width of improvements or right-of-way vary significantly from typical, show a cross-section for each segment. Next slide, please. This is a good example because it contains all needed information. The layout plan shows the location of those cross-sections, and the cross-sections show the existing condition, proposed work, dimensions, right-of-way lines. Next slide, please. In some cases, separated existing and proposed cross-sections will be needed to clearly show the before and after construction conditions. On this slide, the project changed the width for existing lanes and sidewalks. So the before and after cross-sections are needed to clearly show the difference. Next slide, please. We do not recommend the cross-section on this slide because first, the cross-section does not show the width and the depth of the new pavement. And considering the actual terrain, a retaining wall is needed, but did not show on the cross-section. A drainage system is needed to prevent flooding, and there might be some environmental issues due to loss of big trees. So the estimate needs to show these items. If the applicant did not count in the retaining wall cost and or environmental mitigation cost in the estimate, the project will have financial difficulties on delivery. Next slide, please. This is another one not recommended because without the label, we do not know if this cross-section is existing or proposed. And the existing roadway width is unknown, and based on the street view, the proposed project most likely does not fit within the existing footprint of the road. And the existing right-of-way is unknown as well. Potential right-of-way acquisition or roadway widening are not shown and are not verifiable. If the project requires right-of-way acquisition, then it needs to properly reflect in the schedule and estimate. So the existing and the proposed condition needs to be shown in the cross sections clearly. Next slide, please. From the past several cycles, we do have some lessons learned on cross sections as well. When preparing the cross sections, show the existing conditions and how they will be changed by the project, such as width of lanes, buffers, sidewalks, on-street parking, number of lanes. For project with complexity, show existing and proposed conditions on separate cross sections. Show proposed structure sections as well, so you will not forget to include it in the cost estimate. Show existing and proposed right-of-way lines, and you will have some ideas on what to expect in right-of-way phase. Please also show how the proposed conditions will be tied into the existing terrain, and consider potential drainage issues. Don't forget drainage issues, always there. With this, I will wrap this section and we can take some questions. Next slide, please.
Hi, Trina. So we
Hi.
did receive one question from Oscar Sai, and he's asking, does the ATP application as a PSR equivalent basically take the place of a PID in the Caltrans project development process?
Yes, similar, the same level of effort.
Great, thank you. That's the only question we have so far.
Yeah, thank you, Elika. Yeah, with this one, I will turn it over to Desiree.
Oh, Trina, before you go, we just got another question that came in. This is from Michael Williams. He's asking, is this, this is going to be my question for Trina on this topic. How do we handle reflecting a large, i.e. lengthy project? I have one that's almost 8 miles long as one project.
For the location map is, they can always have, they can use, the different scales, because small one, you can have a small scale, bigger one, you can have a larger scale, right? And for the location map, for the project layout plan, I think they can use, just like how do they develop the design for the roadway. They can have the match lines, they can cut into, they can fit the design into the normal size and use the match line to link those plans. So that's typically what we do. And if he needs some examples, we can provide.
Great, thank you, Trina. We have another one that came in from Luke Miner. If requesting funds for construction phase for new infrastructure, sorry, I think I read that weird. If requesting funds for construction phase for new infrastructure, is there a requirement that the environmental document will be approved by a certain date in addition to this PSR equivalent?
No, PSR equivalent, just like I said, similar to the pit phase. So with this one, they can go into the next phase, which is the project approval and environmental document. So that's the phase after this. Is that clear to?
Yeah, if they're only requesting construction funds, then you just, by the time they come in for an allocation, they would need to show that their environmental is done, that their PS&E package is done, their right-of-way funds, their right-of-way phase is done. So yeah, it would just need to be shown when they want to come in for an allocation, but not necessarily when they submit the application. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I actually got a follow-up from Oscar. Does the application take the place of a PID only if it is awarded by the CTC or region?
The application takes the place of a PID regardless. The application is the PSR.
Yes. Application is a PID or PSR equivalent. Yeah.
Great. Those are all the questions I'm seeing at this time.
Thank you, Alika.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. The project estimate is an Excel spreadsheet that shows the itemized construction costs of the project. Once again, the items shown in that estimate need to be consistent with the other elements of the application. Next slide, please. The project cost estimate, is attachment F and can be found on our website. This estimate template needs to be included in the application's attachments. The project elements need to be shown separately, showing the quantities of each item, utilizing the appropriate unit and unit costs. Only certain items can be used as lump sum, and a tab is provided in the spreadsheet that has a list of allowable lump sum items. The spreadsheet also allows for non-ATP eligible elements to be included in the overall project by providing the flexibility of including we want slide 44. Okay. Where was I at? Okay. So the spreadsheet also allows for non-ATP eligible elements to be included in the overall project by providing the flexibility of including non-participating costs, and also allows items that are planned to be performed by the California Conservation Corps or the local urban corps to be broken out from standard items. The estimate sheet also includes contingency costs, and the project estimate should also include ATP project development costs for all phases, meaning the project should show the estimate should show the environmental costs, and if there are right-of-way costs associated with the project, then those should be shown as well. The project estimate sheet will help you complete the project funding section of the application. The costs shown in the project estimate should match the funding shown in the project funding section. You can also show the construction engineering costs separate from the construction items. Next slide. As I mentioned before, you have flexibility to show the larger project along with the non-participating ATP costs as one project. Note that non-participating / non-eligible ATP costs are not considered leverage. They cannot be used to leverage your project, your ATP project. Okay, next slide. This slide is similar to the slide before, but it also shows the lump sum tab that was added back in cycle 5. That is found in the attachment F spreadsheet, and it has a list of the allowable lump sum items. Next slide. So this is what we don't want to see. All items are shown as lump sum units in the estimate here. We're not able to verify if the cost of the project are reasonable or if they are consistent with the other items and quantities shown in the application. Next slide. So some lessons learned for project estimates. Show the total cost for each phase regardless of the funding source. And refer to the lump sum items tab for allowable lump sum items instead of using lump sum for all items in the estimate. Some delivery items to consider are that the ATP does not allow for cost increases. So consider your project schedule when you plan to start construction and account for inflation in your unit costs. Some of the ATP funds are federal and some projects may receive federal funds. The ATP guideline, the CTC's ATP guidelines and the federal aid project funding guidelines state that any projects over $1 million need to be federal aid eligible. So be conservative in your estimate by accounting for the possibility of receiving federal dollars if your project is over $1 million, such as the need to consider the cost to complete NEPA, and also account for the need to hire a consultant. Next slide. Number 5 on the engineer's checklist is the crash safety data, collision maps, and countermeasures. Next slide. So this is within question 3 of the application. The PE must confirm that the crash data shown is depicted accurately.
Sorry, Desiree, I'm not really sure why my computer is doing this. Give me a second. I apologize. It froze for a second. I'm gonna unshare and reshare.
Okay. Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so the PE must confirm that the crash data shown is depicted accurately, shown to scale, and occurred within the area of proposed improvements. And now I'll turn it back over to Trina to discuss the remaining checklist items.
Thank you, Desiree. Hi, everyone. This is Trina again. The project schedule is reflected in the application part A5 and part A6. And in the next several slides, we will discuss the factor impacting the delivery schedule. Next slide, please. An infrastructure project will have 4 phases: project approval and environmental document phase. We call the PAED phase, design phase, which is PS&E phase, right-of-way phase, and construction phase. Typically, the PAED phase will take from 3 months to 12 months. And for some very complicated projects, the PAED phase will take much longer to complete it. After the PAED phase done, the project can get into PS&E phase and then right-of-way phase. Actually, PS&E phase and the right-of-way phase can happen concurrently. The typical time frame for PS&E phase is from 6 months to 12 months, and the typical right-of-way phase is from 6 months to 18 months. After the design completed and the right-of-way certified, the project can get into the construction phase. Because ATP Cycle 6 will program funds for 4 years, which is from fiscal year 23-24 to fiscal year 26-27. Your proposed schedule needs to fit into the programming year. Next slide, please. When preparing the schedule, make sure the schedule is aligning with the construction season, because some of the projects have very limited construction window due to the environmental constraints. If the project involves other funds, the schedule needs to fit with other funding schedule as well, such as the local funds, STIP, or other federal funds. The current process is, before you start your work in a particular phase, you will need to get the CTC allocation for that phase first. So in your schedule, consider the time for allocation preparations. CTC will meet 7 times a year. On the slide is the link to find the critical dates for allocation preparations. There are some other factors need to take into consideration as well. Because PSR equivalent application is to clearly document the needs and the purposes, the application needs to engage with the community to determine if the project meets their needs. If the communities have different opinions from what has been proposed, the proposed scope most likely needs some changes. To meet the community needs, we have several scope changes because of inadequate community engagement, and preparing a scope change request needs a lot of staff effort and time. For PAED design and the right-of-way phases, please consider the time needed for consultant procurement if the agency designed to do the consulting firm, if the agent decide to hire a consulting firm to do the work. Next slide, please. For PAED phase, the project schedule needs to provide adequate time for NEPA if the project construction cost is over 1 million, and provide adequate time for technical studies related with culture, biological, and historical items, such as protection of historical properties, also called Section 106, consultation with tribes, historical districts, species and impact to habitat, construction windows because of bird nesting and migration. And the PAED phase schedule also needs to provide adequate time for regulatory clearance. And we listed the most common ones on this slide. The 401 permit from Water Resources Control Board, the permit from Army Corps of Engineers, such as 404 permit, get clearance from Department of Fish and Wildlife, and if the project is in a coastal zone, get coastal development permit from California Coastal Commission. Next slide, please. For PS&E phase, the project schedule needs to consider project complexity. More time is needed for a more complicated project. Consider stakeholder input as well, because you don't want the last surprise from your stakeholders. If needed, include drainage system, utility, right-of-way, and environmental mitigation needs, and this will help to get more accurate cost estimate. If the proposed work encroach on state right-of-way, coordinate with Caltrans to ensure that the design meets Caltrans standards. In design phase, there is a need to secure necessary environmental permits, such as Army Corps of Engineers 4A permit. It might take up to 2 years or sometimes even longer. So consider those when you do your PS&E phase schedule. Next slide, please. For right-of-way phase, the project schedule needs to consider temporary construction easement, since new construction or reconstruction of sidewalk generally requires temporary access easement. Property owners may have to be compensated for the easements. The schedule needs to consider the time for negotiation with the property owners. If the project encroaching on state right-of-way, the applicant needs to consider the time to get Caltrans encroachment permit as well. Besides, the schedule also needs to provide enough time for railroad involvement and coordination if the project encroaching on railroad right-of-way. Suggest a minimum of 18 months into consideration. The right-of-way schedule needs to provide enough time for utility relocations especially if there is power poles involved. The past couple years, wildfires made the utility company super busy. Because they are super busy on repairs and relocations, their schedules are jumped up. So if the power pole involved, please seriously consider those time frame. And the right-of-way schedule also need to provide enough time for right-of-way acquisition. If need to do the condemnation, the process will take at least 18 months. Next slide, please. The warrant study and the guidance are in the engineer's checklist attachment K. Next slide, please. Warrant studies and the guidance are to provide an engineering study for new traffic control signals with the name and the license number of the responsible engineer. This is required if the application has traffic signal improvements. Next slide, please. The additional narration and documents are in the engineer's checklist attachment K as well. Next slide, please. Ensure that the application text in the narrative questions is consistent with engineering logic and calculation. In the meantime, the calculations used to develop plans and estimate, as well as the engineer's checklist, support the answers of narrative questions. If there is something unique, such as non-standard elements, please attach the appropriate documentation showing engineering decisions and calculations. With this, I will wrap up the infrastructure presentation and we can take some questions if there is any.
Okay, Trina, so we have one question that's come in so far, and this is from Michael Williams, and he's asking, how should the railroad involvement be viewed currently, as they seem to be totally non-responsive or supportive of any kind of project in or around their right-of-way? How realistic is it to Caltrans that projects have any interaction with them?
For the suggestion I will give is plan ahead, because we do have some issues with some projects encroach onto the railroads right away. But we do have some very successful projects because they plan ahead. So the suggestion I will give is plan ahead and leave enough room and the time to communicate and work with the railroad.
Great, thank you. So we have another question that came in from Oscar Sai. He's asking, PIDs I have completed in the past and am working on have been in the form of a PSR PID, or PDS, excuse me. Could you please briefly describe Caltrans's reviews and approval process between submittal of an ATP application as a PSR equivalent and Caltrans signatures to proceed to the PAMED phase?
For Caltrans, when we develop the PID document, we we have the PID document guidelines. And I think the local agency can get onto our design division's website, and there's a guideline clearly stated what is needed, what will contains in the PID documents. So that's something, if that's the Caltrans develop the projects, that's the guideline we need to follow. And for the local agencies, they need to do the similar effort, even sometimes a little bit different, but they need to follow pretty much, they need to provide the similar or almost the same level information to make sure their application is PSR equivalent.
And then we had a follow-up question in regards to Michael's earlier question. But even if you plan ahead, still sometimes the railroad agency still is non-responsive. What should we do?
Mm,
Hi. I wanted to jump in on this one because this we've heard of this lately as it's always been an issue, but we have somewhat heard that it's more of an issue. So I think I wanted to hear more from the person who asked the question, if the problem is getting worse, and yeah, and from anyone else, I'd like to hear a little bit more about this.
Okay. So Michael, if you're okay with it, I'll go ahead and unmute your line, and then you'll be free to speak. You're self-muted currently.
Okay, how about now? Okay. So yeah, my question I think was valid, and thank you for the answer, but that was the standard answer we got. And the person that asked the follow-up question, that's really what I was getting at. It doesn't matter how far you plan ahead. It's not the issue of that. It's the issue of the willingness of the railroads to work on projects, even if they involve safety. You know, that's like their number one thing. They always say, oh, safety, safety, safety. And they have a bunch of, you know, programs around that. But when we have projects that interact or intersect with the railroad, and we want to build class 1 facilities to get people away from the railroads, you know, they block and balk at every other kind of crossing other than the existing crossings, you know, the standard railroad crossings. And for a long time, the last couple of years, it has gotten worse. So Lori, yes, it's gotten worse. And part of it is, for a while they were dealing with, you know, all the old school people that had been there at the railroads for 30 years. And then they got a bunch of new consultants, and they just put up this barrier of consultants. So now you want to go to BNSF, you want to go to UP, you go through these consultants that are just buying time and being kind of a barrier. And then when you finally still get to the railroad, nothing happens. I mean, there's almost no, if you look at your projects, I'll bet most of your projects that you had that were deactivated or defunded, I bet a lot of them were probably railroad issues that people just couldn't get through, the right-of-way issues with the railroad. So it's really, you know, it kind of gets to the federal level, I think, dealing with the railroad. But I mean, that's Caltrans and FHWA. It's like you guys have to find some way to like get them to move. And I know you don't control that, but it's like we have all these projects. I'm not the only one, but I mean, it's kind of like an issue, and it just seems to be getting worse. That's it.
Thank you. So the reason I wanted to hear more about it is because if I remember correctly, and Beverly or Alika might remember more, I think that we talked about this, having this come to a commission meeting as a topic. And so I'm going to take this back to my management and say that this came up in this workshop as where, from what I'm understanding, it's gotten to the point of it's basically impossible to build a project where you have to deal with the railroad. So no promises that we can do anything, but we can try to bring this to a commission meeting and at least have a public discussion about it. And then I don't know if Desiree and Trina, if you have any other suggestions.
I don't have any other suggestions outside of, you know, what Trina had already said about planning ahead. But yeah, it's one of those situations where you just can't control what they're how responsive the railroad agencies are. That's why we said, provide at least a minimum of 18 months in your schedule.
I think that what they're saying is that it doesn't even matter, that you could give yourself, 10 years and it's not going to make a difference. So, and if that's really the case, then I mean, then I think it's almost like projects that have any kind of critical interaction with railroads, and they're not deliverable, and that's not, we don't want that at all. So I think that we can, at our level, we can't do anything, but I think that we can take it up to our management and to the commissioners, and then, I don't know, Desiree and Trina, you could take this back to your management as well, and we'll see what we can do from there.
Yes, we will.
So we did get a couple of other comments that came in regards to this topic. Oscar recommended possibly going through the Cal PUC. And he also mentioned especially the CPUC rail crossing and engineering branch. And then we have Candace Vanderhyde, who recommended, how about working with Caltrans Railway Group through your DLAE? And then, let's see.
Alika, if
Yes.
either Oscar or I think Candace was the other person, if either one of them wants to, or both, if they want to come off mute and give a little bit more information on their suggestions, it might help everyone.
Sure. Okay. So let me unmute Oscar. Okay. Oscar, you are now free to speak.
Hi, everyone. This is Oscar from Stephen Grover and Associates Architecture and Engineering. We have worked on some projects that have dealt with railroads in the past. Michael, I'm not sure if you're having more trouble dealing with the BNSF or the UPRR. I know the CPUC does handle a lot of the rail, basically the rail buses. So I wonder if going through them might be useful. If it's a rail crossing, I think in the past we've experienced that grade separated crossings such as overpasses are a little more palatable than at grade crossings of railroads, which a lot of the railroads seem to not want. They don't want people crossing the tracks in any way at grade. So we design bike ped over crossings and under crossings. So I wonder if this information helps.
Great, thank you, Oscar. And let's see, Candace, did you want to add anything? I've unmuted you, so. Oh.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I have had a really great experience I'm 4 years into working with the CPUC on a set of 4 at-grade crossing improvement projects. It was all started with applying for the Section 130 funding that they help coordinate, with the feds. And then once you get the approval for the funding, then it used to be that it would go to a railway group that was separate from your DLAE. As of 2019, though, late 2019, they actually moved it under local assistance. So each local assistance office is supposed to have someone that specializes in railway. And that transition has taken some time, where we were originally supposed to be in contract and moving to construction this time 2 years ago on 2 of the projects. We are just now going into construction on those leading 2 projects. However, the CPUC staff and our railway group / DLAE group have been integral from start to finish, scoping the project to getting it funded, to now actually getting it out there on the street. And all of our, well, at least 3 of our 4 at-grade crossing projects specifically are focused on bike ped safety because of where they're at in our city. So there's a definite appreciation in that design process, that preliminary design, where that they knew that was something that we needed to focus on. And UP had representatives involved from the get-go, Metrolink, Metro. However, there was a lot of change at UP in the last couple of years, staff-wise as well, between retirements and COVID. So the folks that were originally assigned to our projects are no longer in those roles, and it has taken some time to get people back, you know, from UP to get re-engaged on our projects. But I will say time and again, the CPUC staff and our DLE railway person have been they've been responsive, they've been helpful, they've helped kind of backdoor UP on a couple of things just to try and circumvent the staffing issues there so that we could keep moving forward and get our contract signed. So I would highly recommend, as Oscar said, CPUC, or you're going to your DLAE and trying to find someone through your local assistance office that specializes in working with railway. Our projects are huge, $10 million projects, and they've been very successful.
So Oscar and Candace, I really appreciate you adding that. So Desiree and Trina probably understood a lot more of that than I did, but it sounded like very useful information. And I think another thing that we can do is take some of your recommendations and even put that in somewhere in our guidance or something that might help applicants some. Yeah, and so we can do that. And like I said, we'll commit to taking this issue up to our management and see if there's any other ways that we can work on it.
We have a couple of other comments and hands raised that have come in. Michael, you are now unmuted.
Okay, yeah, and I'm just going to take a quick second. So thank you, Oscar and Candace. I agree with you guys. I've worked with the CPUC and Caltrans's railway group, and they're great for at-grade crossings. So this is really kind of looking for opportunities to do class 1 facilities. So I'm looking for grade separation issues, and that's in particular, just like for the East Bay Greenway, that's where the railroads will stop working with you. It's like they'll do all the at-grade crossings, and so I agree with you. For at-grade crossings where you don't have enhancements or improvements already there, that's the way to go. All those things you said are correct. But it's like when you're looking for grade separation opportunities, that's in particular where the railroads don't want to work with you and where they won't be responsive. And so it's like some of those issues. So I agree. Thank you, Lori. If you guys will need to take it because it does need to get bumped up. It's like it's stalling a lot of large projects, and everything shouldn't be at grade crossings they're more dangerous than a grade separation. Grade separation, you get rid of the problem altogether. At grade, things still happen. So it's like we can't just make everything and say at grade separation, at grade crossings are the only way we can ever do any work. So I think it's both things, but I don't want to take away from the people that are doing really great work that Candace and Oscar have referred to. I agree with that, but it doesn't solve all the problems. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next, we have Catherine Carr. You've been unmuted and you're free to speak. I'm showing yourself muted, Catherine.
Good. Can you hear me now? Good, thank
Yes.
you. I'm commenting on trying to work with the railroad also, but from another perspective. Not only do I do, I'm the ATP, but I'm also working on a corridor management plan. And one of the focuses is stakeholder engagement. And you can't get any reply or anything from them. And I'm dealing with a corridor that depends heavily on railway, and freight. So thankfully the, Sustainable Freight Planning Office in headquarters is helping, but that's even taking months to find the information because it's not, again, it's relying on documents and plans and reports and not really a one-on-one conversation with the railroads. So it's through not just ATP projects. I think it's through the whole, through all our projects and plans.
Yeah, Catherine, from what I understand, that this is a very big problem that goes far beyond active transportation projects. And what I find most troubling is when I hear people say that nobody even responds, which I find very bizarre. But yeah, so thanks, Catherine.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next, we have Louis Zhao.
Sorry about that. I pushed the wrong button. This is Louis Zhao, CTA. So Lori, I think I've talked to you extensively about this. We have a lot of projects that we're doing on our end. And unlike most counties, our county has a lot of railroads, some active, some inactive, some barely active. And I was actually going to say a lot of what Oscar said, because we have run into so many issues with even considering doing an underpass. And a lot of the railroads would just straight out say no. We've had issues with trying to get responses that would take nearly 6 months for them to respond to us, or even the county or any of our project delivery personnel. And in our case, we were very unfortunate because our project has been going on since 2012. And we were running into issues where they would completely fire a whole division and have a complete change in opinion after we've done cost estimates, designs, secured funding for right-of-way purchases and things like that, and to the point where it would almost triple the cost of a project overnight because of the fundamental changes that would happen at each individual railroad. So I think 18 months, I think, is kind of on the early end. We've been going on this for almost 10 years, trying to acquire a small sliver of property so we can run a bikeway through it, and that's just a parallel bikeway, and even running crossings is another problem. So, Lori, I was thinking of two things. I think one, bringing it up and escalating to the commissioners is one thing, but I think the other thing too that might be helpful is looking at best practices and design practices. And I don't know if Caltrans has that available in their manuals, but I almost feel like what I'm hearing with a lot of the speakers here and a lot of what the commenters is that we're all running into the same set of problems, and it seems like everyone's going into this without some type of guidance on what would make sense or would be considered acceptable by the railroads. And if there is some type of, not necessarily hardline like guidance on how to do it, but a universal best practices on what has worked so far, I think would be helpful. Because what we're doing is that we're trying to model some of our projects to something that we're trying to connect to another bikeway on another county, and we're trying to model exactly what they're doing. And apparently, 5 years since they've installed it, they've changed the policies, and we can't do exactly what they're doing. So I'm just thinking that it would be helpful, at least for all the applicants, all the agencies are considering doing something like this, to maybe have some type of universal guidance that would be helpful for many of us to kind of see what would be the best course of action first, and then we could jump into making those minute changes that would satisfy some of the requirements that the railroads are looking for.
That is
Thanks.
an excellent idea, Louis. Yeah, I think that we can do that. I don't know, Desiree and Trina, do you know what would be the best place to put that kind of guidance?
For the local assistance, we do have some menus and we have some suggestions. Maybe we can, we can discuss, and this one could be, post on, once it's done, could be posted on our website for the best practices. Yeah, because some of our policies and some of our procedures is the best practice as well. So yeah, I think we can incorporate this once it's done.
Thanks, Trina. So if there's more comments, it'd be great to hear those. But for all of you that are speaking, we are recognizing this as a major issue. So it's possible you may get an email from me or one of us asking you for like more information so I can put this together in some kind of comprehensive way to figure out how to deal with it.
So next we have Ditas Esperanza.
My question is much more detached from the railroad. When do you anticipate the call for project will be and the deadline to submit application for cycle 6?
So I can jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead, Alika,
Oh, I was going to say, we are anticipating the call for projects to go out after we adopt the final 2023 ATP guidelines at the March 2022 meeting. And we are, I believe we finalized the schedule for the applications to be postmark dated by June, correct? June of 2022.
Yeah, I think I can't remember. I think we actually have a date. It's mid-June.
Yeah, and I don't think the postmark would apply anymore since we're not doing hard copy.
Yeah, so we're not mandating hard copies. It's possible we may request a hard copy from you. So it would be that the electronic submittal is by whatever that date is in June. I think it's on our tentative schedule.
And
so,
this is Beverly. The date that we currently have on the schedule is June 15th, 2022.
Okay. So
June 15th is the deadline to submit?
Yes.
Ooh, that's really soon.
Go ahead.
And call for project in March sometime?
Yes.
Wow, that's fast.
Well, if I was an applicant, I wouldn't be waiting until the call for project goes out to start my application. I mean, it's
that's why I asked. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean the application is not going to change a whole lot. We will probably, tweak it here and there, but the basics have been the same for the last couple cycles. So, you should be gathering all of your information, and that March to June is what we've been working. Basically, that's the kind of schedule we've been using the last few cycles. So, yeah.
I guess I better start working. No Christmas holiday for me.
Nope.
All right. Thank you, and I'm glad I asked.
Yes.
Of course. Next up, we have Josh Lee. Josh, you're unmuted and free to speak.
Right. So, thank you. This is Josh from SBCTA. So just going back to the railroad question, we're also, it's one thing to coordinate with railroads, but it's also after the coordination, you got to come up with that cost estimate. And oftentimes it's practically impossible to get a cost estimate from them on their review process. So I think that's another thing. So I think a best practices at the state level, I think that would be fantastic, because at least for us, for the last few cycles, Our crossings have come in just on ped gates alone. They were costing anywhere from $1.2 million to $1.5 million. So that's a lot for ped gates crossing. So I think some assistance at the state level to kind of coordinate that effort, I think would be helpful. The other part is, Lori, can we also add CDFW to the mix as well? Sometimes it's practically impossible for us to estimate the cost related to mitigation. And oftentimes during the design phase, and environmental phase, that's when you get the final cost. And those ratios sometimes could just kill the project in terms of mitigation. So thank you.
Thank you. That's really good suggestions. Thank you, Josh.
Okay, we received a few additional comments I'll read off. We have one suggestion from David Raperta, and he said the UP Public Projects Manual gives guidance on what UP will and will not allow in or crossing their right of way. And he provided a link, so what I'll do is I'll include that in the chat so that everyone who is on this webinar can access it. So thank you for that, David. Victoria, let's see. Victoria also provided a comment that was very helpful. She said the other person at Caltrans who is helpful with all things rail and mass transportation related is Kyle Gradinger. So thank you, Victoria, for that. James O'Brien wrote in, the problem with the railroad issue is the funding deadlines. Example, timely use of funds. Projects involving railroads simply take a long time to deliver for the reasons stated by others. If a project has merits that warrant programming of the ATP funds, perhaps the CTC will have to allow extra time for these projects. Of course, the extra time required for railroad involvement typically increases the cost of the project, so that needs to be considered in the funding amount.
Okay.
And then we received another comment. This one is from Keith Williams. For the purpose of STIP programming, may a cover letter referencing the ATP application suffice as a PSR equivalent, provided the project is not in a state right-of-way and the executive director of the regional agency approves? If not, what else beyond the ATP project does the STIP need for PSR equivalency?
I don't understand that question.
Can you repeat again?
Sorry. Actually, let me see if I can just unmute Keith. There we go. Keith, do you want to come on?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, great. I'm trying out a new microphone, so all right. Yeah, so I'll repeat the question, Trina, and then yeah, if you want me to try and paraphrase, I'll do my best. But for the purpose of STIP programming, may a cover letter referencing an ATP application suffice as a PSR equivalent, provided that the project is not in state right-of-way and the executive director of the regional agency approves? If not, what else beyond the ATP application does the STIP need for PSR equivalency? Right now, I'm told that for the ATP program, the application itself serves as PSR equivalency. But when you're programming STIP funds, that application is not enough. And so what we want to know is what else is needed, and we're hoping it's just a cover letter referencing that application.
So Keith, can you send me an email, because I don't want to get in trouble with Teresa and Casey, so I'm not going to answer that because I don't want to answer it wrong. So I'll if you send me an email, I'll check in with them to make sure.
All right, thank you.
STIP coordinator in your district that should be able to help with that type of question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we had one more comment, and this was in relation to an earlier question. So this is from James O'Brien. Oh, sorry, this is skipping all over the place. He states, I think Oscar is thinking about a project on the Caltrans right-of-way versus one outside of the right-of-way. I don't think Caltrans will accept the ATP application or PSR equivalent for the PID requirement for the projects within the Caltrans right-of-way. So this was in relation to a question we received earlier from Oscar asking about the, let's see, he asked, PIDs I've completed in the past and I'm working on have been in the form of a PSR-PDS. Could you please briefly describe Caltrans's review and approval process between submittal of an ATP application as a PSR equivalent? So I'm assuming James's comment was in relation to that. And then it looks like that's all we've received at this time.
So Trina and Desiree, is that I wasn't quite following that the question on the PID and the Caltrans right away. Did you understand that? Do we need to follow up on that one?
We have projects on Caltrans right of way all the time within ATP, and we accept them through the application.
Okay.
Great. Those are all the comments and questions we have.
So I just wanted to kind of wrap up this discussion a little bit. That so I know we kind of went on the railroad discussion for a little while, but this workshop is very useful for us to hear about these kinds of issues. And if there's anything else like this that's coming up, let us know. And you know, we need to know what's going on the ground to see if we need to respond in some way. I know Lewis is probably thinking that we've heard this a million times, but you know, just keep bringing it up, and we'll just keep working on it. So thank you.
Okay, so now we'll move on to non-infrastructure. So we'll switch gears a little bit here. So for the next 15 minutes or so, we'll be focusing on non-infrastructure. So per the definition of non-infrastructure, or NI, in the ATP guidelines, non-infrastructure is education and encouragement activities that further the goals of the ATP. So projects can be non-infrastructure only, or they can be infrastructure and non-infrastructure combined. And this includes projects that benefit school students, older adults, or entire communities. And non-infrastructure projects can be startup programs, or they can be new components of existing programs. However, the CTC does intend to focus NI funding on startup programs. And these are places in which no program currently exists. And then for projects with new components added to an existing program, the applicant must demonstrate how the original program is continuing without ATP funding. And then the reason for this is because we do want to try to expand the breadth of NI programming and encourage those communities who have never had NI programs to have the opportunity to implement it. In addition, all non-infrastructure projects must demonstrate how the program is sustainable and will be continued after ATP funding is exhausted. Next slide. So since the non-infrastructure definition could be a new concept to many, we did want to just provide a few examples of non-infrastructure activities which are listed here. Typically, non-infrastructure follows the 6E approach, which include activities related to equity, education, encouragement, enforcement, pre-engineering, and evaluation. So here on the slide, some examples are walking and biking curriculum in schools, walking and biking skills classes, and they could also be called bike rodeos or mock cities for students. They can be walk or bike to school days or work days. They can be community education at community events, or safety education at community events, student or parent safety patrols, crossing guard programs at schools, temporary demonstration projects, or safe walking and biking media campaigns. Please note that NI is programming. So it's that education and encouragement piece. And it's not solely public engagement for an infrastructure project. As you can see on the right side of the screen here, this document lists many examples, and this is a resource from the ATRC. It's our ATRC's non-infrastructure common activities fact sheets. So you can look to these for ideas and inspiration of various components of non-infrastructure programs. And you can also find a list of examples in Appendix B of the ATP guidelines. And we will be updating this appendix for the cycle 6 cycle. So it'll be a little different than last time, just a little reorganized, but the same project types. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we will get into the PSR equivalent details of a non-infrastructure project. So whether it's standalone or it's the NI piece of a combo project. So attachment G of the application is the non-infrastructure work plan, and it's called Exhibit 25R. It formerly was 22R, but now it is 25R. It is an Excel spreadsheet, and it is included in the meeting attachments here in GoToWebinar. Just note that the attachment is from cycle 6, so it may have some slight updates or changes. Sorry, it was from cycle 5, so it may have some slight updates or changes for cycle 6. So when you do actually apply for an application, just make sure you use the most updated form. But generally, it should be the same. So on the 25R, it is the NI project scope. So if the project is awarded, the project applicant will be accountable for delivering what is listed in the 25R. And this is important because the 25R outlines the tasks and deliverables, the schedule, and the costs associated with the NI project. So the 25R is our way of verifying the deliverability and compliance with NI guidelines. So here's what needs to be included. Make sure that when you describe what you describe in the narrative of the application is also included in the 25R. So Caltrans does cross-check the narrative with the 25R, and we have seen that some applications describe certain activities in the narrative questions, but when you look to the 22R, they are not listed or they're extremely vague and not defined. So then it's really hard for us to compare the two. So it's very important to make sure that whatever you write about in the narrative is also listed in the 22R or 25R. Also, make sure you establish any partnering commitments with other agencies, such as schools or school districts, a local health department, or law enforcement, prior to submitting the application. And this is especially true on a combo project when a city or county may be the applicant, and then the public health department might be implementing the non-infrastructure work. So this is really important because we also have seen applications that have come in stating they are partnering with an agency for non-infrastructure work, but then once funded, the applicant then actually asks that partner and they don't want to be involved for whatever reason. So then the applicant has to do a scope change. So please do get all commitments ahead of time prior to submitting the application. Also note that non-infrastructure projects can use a consultant or nonprofit or community-based organization to do non-infrastructure work. And if this is the case, once the project is funded, this work will need to be competitively bid. So specific consultants or nonprofits cannot be identified in the application. And we know this does cause some concern for NI work, but it is a requirement in state guidance. So we will continue to work toward allowing more flexibility for nonprofits and community-based organizations, but it is a larger issue, so it'll take some time. So they do need to be competitively bid for consultant work. Also, be sure to reference and use the non-infrastructure guidance for eligible expenditures under the ATP. This is probably one of the most common causes of our comments on applications. For example, we have to ensure that the spending on certain safety incentives for participation isn't excessive or wasteful. So all items have to have a purpose, be under a maximum cost, and then there are some limitations as to how they can be given out. The non-infrastructure guidance also has sections on staff costs and travel costs, material costs, and more. Also note that we have appendices in the NI guidance for media campaigns, open streets, and demonstration projects, as well as helmet distribution criteria. So be sure to review that if your project entails any of these components. And we revise this guidance every cycle based on feedback. So if you do have any suggestions prior to cycle 6, please let us know via email, or the next workshop, I believe, we'll be talking about non-infrastructure in more detail, so you can let us know there as well. Okay, next slide. So the next 3 slides here, we will break up the 25R into the scope, cost, and schedule, and then give you some tips on what to include in each. So for the scope, be sure to break up the entire project into the overarching tasks, which are a different tab on that Excel form. And many projects break it up into the E's, or they'll do it by location or by school. So whichever one makes the most sense for your project is fine. Then on each task, break it down further into individual activities, which are each line. And this is where we look for the activities to be consistent with what is described in the narrative. So this is a very important piece. Also, please be detailed and specific. We want to see you quantify the number of activities and state the tangible deliverables. So for example, instead of just listing bike rodeos as an activity, you should state that you will be conducting 6 bicycle rodeos for 4th and 5th graders, and you will do 2 per year for the 3 years of the project. So as you can see, this gives us much more context, and it displays exactly how this activity will be delivered. And make sure you can commit to what you write, as this will be what you are accountable for when delivering the project. And then if you do have any additional detail that doesn't fit in that little box in the Excel sheet, you can explain it in the task notes section. So there's more room for more detail. Next slide. And now for costs. Please do ensure that the total cost on the 25R matches the PPR and the application cover page. Ensure compliance with the non-infrastructure guidance, like I mentioned before. And again, this is really important, as this is typically where we find the most inconsistencies. The 25R also asks for staff time. So be sure to include your agency staff time or partner agency staff time. And then for consultants, you can determine a consultant budget that will go out to bid. And then there is other tabs called other costs, and these you want to make sure you include all the anticipated costs for travel and equipment, supplies and materials, and incentives, and any other direct costs that your project will include. And all of these categories directly match with the non-infrastructure guidance. So again, double check in the guidance what is eligible. And throughout all of the tasks, make sure you indicate if any costs are coming from another source other than ATP. All right, next slide. Okay, and finally for the schedule, please do ensure that the schedule on the 25R matches the PPR and then the application, and the schedule is listed in section A5. So we look for consistency there. For safe routes to school projects, you do need to coordinate with school schedules. So, if there's summer breaks or you're not doing specific programming during the summertime, make sure that's reflected. For combo projects, think about if the non-infrastructure tasks need to coordinate with the infrastructure schedule. So, for example, will the safety classes and encouragement activities be in preparation for the new improvements, or will they come after the new improvements are in place so that you can encourage the use of the new facilities? So make sure your non-infrastructure lines up with how it fits with the infrastructure. And again, just please note that non-infrastructure is not public engagement for the infrastructure project. Every cycle, we unfortunately do see 1 or 2 combo projects that come in. So then in that case, the non-infrastructure isn't true non-infrastructure, so it would get disqualified, which could impact the score. So just make sure you understand the definition of what non-infrastructure is, so that when you apply, your project will get scored appropriately. And next slide. At this point, we can take some questions on non-infrastructure. Don't know if we have any questions.
Sorry, glitched for a sec. We don't have any questions that have come in at this time.
Okay. All right, well, feel free to add them in if you do have any, and we can move on to planning then. Okay, so this next section will be focused on plans. And if we go to the next slide. So plans are another project type in the ATP, and per the definition of a plan in the ATP guidelines, a plan is to develop a community-wide bicycle, pedestrian, safe routes to school, or active transportation plan that encompasses or is predominantly located in a disadvantaged community. So the first priority of funding will go to applicants that have neither of those 4 types of plans. The second priority of funding will go to eligible applicants that may have one of those types of plans, but not all. And then the lowest priority for funding will be for updates to plans older than 5 years old. And the reason for this is because we want to encourage agencies that do not have any sort of active transportation plan to apply to complete one, as a plan is a very important step in order to apply for and then construct community-driven active transportation projects in the future. So we definitely want to encourage agencies that do not have a plan to apply. Also note that a plan is a standalone project type, and it cannot be combined with any other project type. So we have seen some applications come in that try to combine a plan with non-infrastructure or a plan with infrastructure. And again, just note that that is not allowed. Next slide. So now we'll get into the PSR equivalent details of a plan. So attachment H of the application is the plan scope of work, and it is called the Exhibit 25 plan. And this is an Excel spreadsheet. Again, it's included in the GoToMeeting attachments. And like the other documents, it may be slightly updated over the next couple of months in preparation for cycle 6. So just make sure when you apply, you are using the most current version. The 25 plan, like I mentioned, is the plan project scope. So if awarded, the applicant will be accountable for delivering what is listed in that document. And it is important because it outlines the tasks, the schedule, and the costs associated with the plan development. The 25 plan also allows us to verify compliance with the ATP guidelines plan components, which are listed in Appendix A. So here's what needs to be included. Be sure that what you describe in the narrative of the application is included in the 25 plan. Similar to non-infrastructure, Caltrans does cross-check the narrative with the 25 plan. And we have seen some applications come in that describe certain activities in the narrative, but then when you look at the 25 plan, you can't find them there. So for example, community engagement is a big piece of the planning project. So in the application question, the applicant may describe doing community surveys, tabling at farmers markets, and other existing community events. and having an interactive feedback website. However, if we look to the 25 plan, it may not list any of this specifically. So that's where we'd find the discrepancy, and we'd want the applicant to actually list those activities in the 25 plan. So the takeaway here is to make sure that everything is consistent. Also, be sure to include the plan components sheet. And this is one of the tabs in the 25 plan. And all this entails is a check mark to ensure that you've considered the required components that should be included in a plan. And if you do not have that component included, all we need is just a brief explanation as to why. This doesn't impact your score if you don't include all components, but we just want to ensure that they've all been considered. We also often find that this piece is missing, so make sure that you fill out that tab, as it could be missed at the bottom of that Excel spreadsheet. And finally, be sure to include the key planning process tasks. And this includes things such as existing conditions analysis, robust community engagement, project prioritization, and then an implementation plan, because ultimately we want what is in the plan to then be constructed. So please do note that plans are planning documents, so they cannot go beyond a 30% conceptual design. So make sure you keep that in mind when completing the plan. If it goes further than that, it gets into the next phase. All right, so now we will go into the next two slides, which will talk about scope and cost and schedule. So for the scope, you will want to break your project up into overarching tasks, which are each row that have a blue color on the form. So then once you have those overarching tasks, you will break up each of those into individual subtasks. And we want to make sure that you are detailed and specific in your task descriptions, again, making sure it matches with the narrative. And then in the far right columns, you will need to select the components that that task will address from the drop-down menu. And these components are the ones that match that project components sheet that I mentioned earlier. And a very important note here, one of the tabs in the 25 plan that we provide is actually a sample scope of work for your reference. So the key piece here is don't just copy that scope of work. You can utilize it, but don't copy it exactly. Your project is unique. So unfortunately, every cycle, we do get a few applications that come in that just use the sample scope of work as their scope. And you know, we know that that's not specific to that project. So please do build your own scope of work, and you can use that sample as reference. Next slide. And now for the cost, please ensure that the costs on the 25 plan match the PPR in the application. Include the anticipated costs for each subtask, and then indicate if any costs are coming from a source other than ATP. And then for the schedule, ensure that the schedule matches the PPR and the application in section A5. And then be sure to include the start and end dates for each task. And next slide, and I believe that's it for the plan section. So we can take any questions on plans.
So I'm not seeing any questions that have come in at this time. We can wait another minute if you want, or we can take those questions at the very end.
Yeah, let's give it a couple seconds, but it seems like we probably can move on. Feel free to reach out to us if you do have any questions.
Nope, nothing has come in yet.
Okay, so we can wrap up. So to wrap up, we have a summary of our top takeaway items. Perform a site visit and walk your project. Be sure to include key staff such as engineers, right-of-way and environmental staff, and key stakeholders to verify deliverability and constructability of your project prior to submitting the application. Remember that all three elements of the application must be consistent. the narrative, cost and schedule, and maps and plans. The scope and application at the time of programming is the approved scope. That is the scope that the project is evaluated and scored on. Any deviations from the scope after programming need to be approved. Community engagement. Ensure the project meets the community's needs. Determine the needs of the community and engage with the community when you are planning and developing the project scope and throughout the life of the project development process. Ensure the plans show where and what project elements are being proposed. And when in doubt, reach out. We have a list of contacts at the end of these slides for you to reach out to with your questions. And that's why we're here. We're here to help. Next slide, please. And some additional project development and delivery takeaways are when you're doing your site visit and preparing your plans, estimate and schedule, consider the following. Look for utility service lines that may need to be relocated and account for them in your costs and schedule. Drainage system installations and modifications need to be considered and shown in the estimate, especially when the curb and gutter are added. Consider driveway conforms to new sidewalks, typically if you're adding new sidewalks adjacent to existing homes. Account for emergency vehicles and truck traffic. Obviously, this considers the context of the location of your project, but when adding sharper turning radii with curb extensions, for example, or adding in inflexible barriers in medians or class 4 bike lanes, consider the need to accommodate larger vehicles or possible emergency access. Consider conflict points at intersections and mitigating against safety issues in those locations. And an additional safety issue to consider is designing for level of traffic stress. You'll want to consider using the type of bike facility that is appropriate to increase proportion of bike trips by increasing the level of perceived safety and comfort for potential users. The ATRC has links to design manuals and classes that go into more detail and show the appropriate design standards required. We'll show those links in later slides. Now I'll turn it back over to Emily.
All right. So now some top takeaways for non-infrastructure to summarize. Please complete your 25R with your specific and unique project, as this is your project scope. The application narrative and the 25R must be consistent. I know we say this all the time, but please make sure it is. Make sure that your project aligns with the goals of the ATP, that it is a true non-infrastructure project with biking and walking and active transportation as the primary purpose. Check eligibility of items by looking at the non-infrastructure guidance. Be specific and quantify as much as possible in your 25R so that we know exactly what you plan to deliver. Establish your public entity partnerships prior to application submittal. And then if you do have any questions, please reach out. As we mentioned, our contact information will be on the last slide. We also have our district contacts, and the ATRC has an excellent team of non-infrastructure technical experts that can also address some of your non-infrastructure questions. Next slide. Okay, so then the top takeaways for plans. Again, make sure your 25 plan is unique and specific to your project. This is your scope. Do not copy the sample project scope. Your application narrative and 25 plan must be consistent, same as everything else. Make sure your project aligns with the goals of the ATP and that it meets the plan components that are in Appendix A of the ATP guidelines. And ensure that your project includes robust community engagement activities, as that is one of the key elements of a plan. And when in doubt, reach out, same as everything else. If you have any questions, let us know. All right, so now I'll hand it over to Summer Lopez, who will give a overview of the Active Transportation Resource Center.
Thank you, Emily. So we're going to wrap up on the Active Transportation Resource Center. So the Active Transportation Resource Center, also known as the ATRC, is a project that's funded through the ATP and whose mission is to increase opportunity for the success of active transportation projects by providing resources, technical assistance, tools, and training to transportation partners across California. We highly encourage you to join our mailing list, where you will receive updates on all things ATP, in addition to any new resources, tools, webinars, workshops, events, or trainings that we have launching at the ATRC. We have also listed our ATP application flash trainings here on this slide. In these trainings, you'll find a wealth of knowledge that will help you with certain pieces of your application. So we highly encourage you to check those out too. The ATRC also has tools that can be used in support of your application, and you can find all of those on our website. Also, I noticed a question that came in about where the PowerPoint will be posted. It'll not only be posted on the CTC's website, it'll also be posted on the Caltrans website on our ATP page, and it'll also be posted along with the slide deck on the ATRC, so you can find it in any of those places. We also wanted to note that the ATRC offers a disadvantaged communities technical assistance program where 10 to 15 recipients will receive tailored assistance, both virtual or in-person site visits, ATP application assistance, and assistance to build capacity that will last beyond the technical assistance timeframe. We talked about this at the last ATP workshop, and the application to apply for this program is currently open. It is linked on this slide. You can also find it on the ATRC website, and it is due December 16th. If you or an agency that you know is in need of this type of assistance, please apply and/or share this application. As we also shared at the workshop a couple weeks ago, the ATRC has a non-infrastructure specific on-call technical assistance through the California Department of Public Health. Our team at CDPH has split the state into 3 regions, and you can contact your district representative, whom you can see listed on this slide, and you can reach out to them at any time at atsp@cdph.ca.gov. They are a wealth of knowledge as well for non-infrastructure project types, and any questions that you have, they'll be able to help you with that as well. We also have an automated counter loan program at the ATRC, which provides free automated pedestrian and bicyclist counting equipment to agencies that need to conduct counts for their active transportation projects. We recognize that it's not required to collect counts for the ATP application. However, agencies are able to take advantage of this program at any time, and you can get started by filling out our interest form that's linked on this slide. And you can also find more information about this program on the ATRC website. And finally, I'd like to share some resources that we have on the ATRC website. These are the resources that Desiree mentioned a few minutes ago. You can find relevant manuals and guides, such as the Caltrans Highway Design Manual and Design Information Bulletins, the NACTO Design Guide, and the FHWA Bikeway Selection Guide. They are all listed on our website, and you can find them at the link in the slide. We also have infrastructure-specific training, such as our Bicycle Transportation Introduction to Planning and Design, which is an online training. This training is an at-your-own-pace training, and you can take it at any time, and I believe it takes about 2 hours. We also have Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian training recordings up on our website, and these recordings are from trainings that were offered earlier this year, so it's very relevant, very fresh material. You can also find non-infrastructure specific training, such as our non-infrastructure webinar recordings. Those are linked here. And we also have a non-infrastructure specific workshop that Emily provided, I believe it was last cycle, and it provides lots of success stories, tips, and tools, all in support of your non-infrastructure application. So make sure to check all those resources out. And these are our contacts. We have the local assistance contacts, which you can find linked on this slide, and also the ATP coordinators at the districts. That is the link here on this slide. And then, of course, all of our contacts at headquarters for infrastructure and non-infrastructure and plans. And that's all that we have. If there's any remaining questions, we're happy to take those now.
Hey, Summer. So we do have one question that came in, and this is from Diana Meehan, and she's asking, is assistance through ATRC only available to disadvantaged communities?
So for the Disadvantaged Communities Technical Assistance Program, yes, you would have to fill out the application, and we will be selecting those communities based on the severity of need for this type of technical assistance. For the non-infrastructure on-call assistance, that's for anybody that needs it, that's planning on either applying for non-infrastructure programs or projects, or for anybody that has an ongoing project now that they have questions about, or just need advice or anything like that.
Great, thank you. Then let's see. Candace, I saw you had your hand raised. Did you still want to be unmuted? Oh, Candace ended up sending in, what considerations will be made for the drastic shift in counts at schools?
Is that referring to like school closures, I'm assuming, or maybe a little clarification on that question?
Yeah, Candace, I've unmuted you, so if you want to come off mute and further explain, that would be great.
Hi, thanks so much. I was trying to find a way to say that in the chat that was better than that. So like at our schools, all the counts we did for our original master plan for Safe Routes to School were done, you know, in like 2016, and the bike ped car counts were drastically different than what we're finding now. There's been a huge shift back to cars, solo cars, lots of, you know, parents making one trip for every kid, and because they can, because some are out of work, but because of just, I think, also social distancing and that sort of thing. But ultimately, you know, we're trying to encourage the shift back, and we want to stay true to our plan, which would be to, you know, continue to provide and improve bike ped facilities so that they're supported in that way. But the current counts are not supporting that use. And so I'm just wondering if one, is anybody else having that sort of experience? And two, if so, is that something that will be accounted for, considering we can't prove that right now in the same way we could in 2016?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And anyone else that wants to jump on to add anything, please feel free. So yes, we have seen this, especially throughout, you know, the pandemic. This has been an issue. And the recommendation that we've been making for the last about year or so is just to collect the counts anyways. We recognize that things are different. The world is different right now, and there's not a whole lot that we can do about it. But of course, you know, keep on encouraging people to ride their bikes and walk, and, you know, keep on implementing your project as you can. But we do know that right now counts are a little bit lower just because of the things that have happened with the pandemic.
Thank you very much.
So at this time, I'm not seeing anything else that's come in. And I don't see any other attendees with their hands raised.
So Alika, let's give it another couple minutes, because really, please ask questions. This is a great opportunity to hear from all of the technical experts here. So please ask questions. We have the schedule till 4, so we are happy to answer any questions for Trina, Desiree, Emily, Summer.
Yeah, to the point before about rail, I kind of wanted to bring. I thought about some other scenarios that we've had in the past with regard to that, and just the fact that, you know, we do allow time extensions for rail. And, you know, in the past, I've seen them come in to get the max up to 20 months. And then we've also, you know, looked into maybe, I think there was maybe like a project that had been segmented where like an earlier portion could go and then like the later portion could go. So I think that, you know, moving forward, it's definitely one of those, you know, things that we're gonna have to take into consideration, obviously, but we have like some creative ways of working around things while still staying within the guidelines, you know.
Thanks, Desiree. I think I remember too that we have had to do some segmenting to deal with railroad issues.
So we do have one hand raised, and that's Candace. Candace, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
You know me. I always have questions. I'm sorry.
I hope Candace is okay.
I'm sorry. That was my youngest getting antsy. My question is, you know, yesterday we had our site visit at Lancaster, and it was really, really beneficial. But I'm sure now that you've done so many of them, I forgot to ask you, what's been the most common set of questions? Maybe like, you know, the FAQs that some of us may not have asked that would be relevant to the general audience here.
Well, I can't believe I'm bringing this up myself, but what we did this last cycle, what everybody was asking about is how we were going to score on this, because we do score on project scope and plan consistency. We started that last cycle, and no one's asked about that, which I'm kind of surprised. So I can talk about that, or maybe all of you trust us. So on the, we have, and I think I got this right, any of you please correct me, there's 7 points available in the large infrastructure application for, I think it's plan, scope, and schedule consistency, I think is what we call it. And then 5 points for medium, which is just plan and scope consistency. And it's a little bit different. And then for the small, I think it's 3 points. And then for non-infrastructure, I think it's 10 points. And then the plans, I think it's 15. Of course, for non-infrastructure and plans, it's a little bit different than for an infrastructure project. But we had, so we scored on this last cycle, and we have very clear guidance for our evaluators on how to score this. Not all of them are, some of them are engineers, some of them aren't. So just so you know, it's not, so take to heart what Trina and Desiree were telling you, you know, that we acknowledge that a lot of these projects haven't even done environmental yet. But while the evaluators are evaluating the project applications, Caltrans is also looking at them, and commission staff is looking at them. And then we had a debrief with every evaluator team on all of their evaluations, and the evaluator teams, I think, did a very good job at scoring that. But then if they struggled at all, we had Trina and Desiree stepped in to help them on any scoring questions they might have had on that particular question. So it worked out well. And sometimes we will, if we really can't tell what a project is, well, it's not likely it will score high, but if for some reason it does, we would struggle to program that project. But we will, if if we're just unsure a bit of the schedule, we'll work with an agency to help them maybe make sure that everyone is comfortable with the schedule that they have proposed in their application. So that was the one thing that I was surprised it didn't come up in this workshop.
Thank you.
Thanks, Candace.
So we have we have a few questions that have come in.
I'll see what I started, Alika.
Yeah, way to go. Okay, so this one is from Michael Williams. He's asking, earlier Trina mentioned that Caltrans has examples of other large and extensive, projects and how to best represent them. How can I or someone get these examples from her?
They can,
go ahead.
they can contact me directly. Yeah, I will provide some of the samples if they need. Yeah.
And then just to let you know, we have on the Commission's website, we have links to all of our successful applications. And some of those are probably better than others in terms of the things that that we were talking about today. But typically, if a project scored high enough to get to be successful for funding, then they would have done a good job on all the PSR equivalency aspects.
So we have another question from Michael. Is it possible to get the contact info or give mine to Oscar, Candace, Josh, and Lewis, the folks that participated in the railroad discussion? I'd like to get more info out of them. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I have everyone's email addresses, so I can introduce you all through email if that helps, Michael. And Oscar, I see you have your hand raised. You are now free to speak.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for your time and the information you provided. To answer Michael, absolutely, I would love to be introduced to him and everybody else who participated in that rail discussion. I wanted to go back and get clarity on the PSR equivalency of the application. When I heard that the application could take the place of a PID, I was wondering, I know that the Caltrans PID, PDPM, it's got very specific requirements for what a PID would look like. And I just wasn't sure how taking the place of a PID works in the form of an application. So I heard different things from Desiree and Trina today.
So I think maybe the issue is that you're wondering if a PSR, if the application is enough for a project that's on Caltrans right of way. Is that what you're asking?
Correct. Is it because you said that it takes the place of a PID, and a PID is that first phase of the Caltrans process, right?
So the PNED phase?
The PID moving into you need a PID to be approved to move into the PNED phase, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So the application submitted would suffice for that document in the PID phase?
It should be, because in Caltrans, why we do the PID is because we try to get the project programmed. So if this project already been programmed, you do not need to do another PSR or PID. You just go to another next phase, this PID phase.
So because all you need to get programmed through the ATP is the application.
Yeah.
And the application has to be, you have to be awarded, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you do have to be awarded for it to suffice as that PID.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. So, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lori.
Oscar, I'm going to ask a couple questions too, and then I'll see if this helps. So say it's a project that's, okay, it's on Caltrans right away, but it's not a Caltrans implemented project. That's what you're asking, right, Oscar?
That's correct. It could be a crossing of Caltrans right away, but the sponsor is the local jurisdiction. Okay.
So I think if the project is successful, gets funded, and gets programmed, then is Caltrans going to ask for something else to be equivalent to the PID, or is it, because they've submitted the application, is that's sufficient?
I don't think so. The Caltrans will ask local agency to do the PID if the project already been programmed.
You're saying they would not ask for something else, right, Trina?
That's why I'm curious why this come up, but we can confirm that with our capital side, because this will involve the capital side capital side oversight. So, but from my past experience, it shouldn't be, but we will confirm.
Yeah, so in order to get the ATP project programmed though, all you need is the ATP application. You do not need the PID.
Yeah.
Right.
But if it serves as the PSR equivalent / PID.
But make sure that you have coordinated with Caltrans during the application process, correct, Desiree and Trina? They should be doing it.
Yeah.
Yes, because your
after.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I just said before, during, and after. Yes.
Yeah. So because your project is within, maybe encroaching to the Caltrans, right away, right? So most likely your design will meet the Caltrans standards. So that's why the Caltrans have, will have heavily oversight role on this project. And for the project needs PID, that's why, you can contact us. We can give you confirmation later on. But right now, what I can think is because the project already been programmed, PID is for project programming. So I don't think you need to do another PID. That's my interpretation, but we will confirm for you. Yeah, you can contact us and confirm this.
Great, thank you. I don't have a project in mind, but it's actually just a question that comes up because having done like PSR PDSs, you need a transportation engineering performance analysis, you need a preliminary environmental assessment, those sorts of other documents and reports that go into that PID phase, which do not go into the ATP application. And that's why I was wondering how one can suffice for the other.
Yeah, because other programs, they do have their own, requirements. But for ATP, this is for the programming document. So after it's been programmed, you just need to go to the next phase, PAD phase. So
I see.
Yeah, but we will confirm this for you. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next we have James O'Brien. James, you are oh, there you go. Yep.
Here I come. Okay, yes, I think I can shine a little light on this. What's going on is the difference between the PID for programming purposes and then what Oscar's probably talking about is if you have, it depends on how much work, it boils down to being about the encroachment permit you need to build anything, even $1 worth on the state right-of-way. Then the encroachment permit in turn affects your right-of-way cert that you need to get your E76 and get implemented. So it affects the schedule. But your encroachment permit process, if it's under $1 million, you do a permit, the permits department reviews it and grants the permit. If it's between $1 million, and I'm not positive on these thresholds, but between $1 million and $3 million of work in the state highway right-of-way, then you need to do this PER, P-E-E-R, Permit Engineering Evaluation Report or something. And that gets a little more review by the permits department. They might even go back to project development and engage them or different departments. That takes more time, so it takes you longer to get your right-of-way cert. If it's over 3 million in the state highway right-of-way, then you need to do a PSR PDS, which really is a document that Caltrans uses to evaluate how much staff time they're going to have to do to review your project. So it's a different issue, but it's related because it's related to the delivery of the project. So when we're doing this programming and we're looking at schedules and determining if they're realistic, you need to think about these things to figure out how long it's going to take you, not to get a PID approved or not, but to get in essence, it boils down to getting your right-of-way cert so you can get your construction allocation if you're on the state right-of-way. So that's why I made in my comment, I talked about, it's more about the review, the project delivery process inside Caltrans. So it's a permitting issue, and it's these thresholds. So it depends on how much of your project's worth or cost is in the state right-of-way determines the level of review that Caltrans is going to have. And it all looks like they're talking about PIDs, but they're not talking about PIDs for programming purposes. They're talking about PIDs for internal project delivery purposes on the state right-of-way. So I don't know if that makes sense. But.
Yeah, I think that is probably where the confusion was coming in, James.
Yeah, it's not Oscar's not talking about programming issues.
Yeah, okay.
And you guys are answering with a programming response, which is
right.
Both sides are, it's just a skew.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you Google Caltrans peer process, you'll get to their, you'll see what I just cited. The permit evaluation engineering report or something. It has to do with encroachment permits.
Yeah, and I'm sure in your local assistance guidance, there's stuff about that for Caltrans encroachment, right? Permits.
It actually takes you to the Caltrans project delivery manual, the so-called gold book, because once you go on the state right away, you got to act like you're Caltrans from a certain delivery. So it really is. For you guys reviewing applications, if somebody has more than $3 million in the state right away, I think the only concern you guys would have reviewing applications is their schedule realistic, right? And that's also what I said about the railroad fix. It's not, you're never going to get the railroad to speed up. They're above all these laws we're taught. You can do best practices, but they're above that. And so I think the real answer there would be the CTC has to accommodate this, and it's really the time lease of funds deadlines that kill these things. Nobody can apply because they can't even meet the 4-year, they're going to go way beyond. Even the one woman that shared her successful story, I think she said it was 4 years or something like that, and that was fast. Well, that's too long for these programming cycles.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points, and that was the reason why I brought up the fact that there are time extensions that we've allowed, or in the past, and all that stuff that CTC has allowed. And usually, a lot of our time extensions are due to railroad involvement. And then to your point about the review process for Caltrans, for projects on Caltrans right away, yes, you're absolutely right. Local assistance doesn't necessarily get into that area. That's for our capital folks. We don't have any capital folks on the line right now, or unless there's some participants, I'm sure there are. But they're in the actual application. We do have what is now called the right-of-way impact checklist. That title might be changing soon. It might be the State Highway System Impact Checklist instead. We're still kind of reviewing that process and that actual form to align it more with the other SB1 programs. But that is the consideration that we like to the applicants to consider, is if this project is on the state highway system, and what type of review it's going to need, and to incorporate that in your schedule and or costs if needed.
Yeah, you could. I think you could add it to your guideline, your application materials, to those thresholds I mentioned, because those I didn't make. Those are thresholds that are in place. So it'd be helpful for the applicant to understand, hey, if you got $5 million in the state right away, you're going to be in the PS and give them a little hint so they can do a better job. That's what we're all about, right? Give them the information so they can make a better application and a realistic schedule. And that one. I deal with a lot of self-help. I do a lot of programming work in delivery with the state highway, and that issue always gets kind of lumped into a more generic checkbox. And I'd be happy to give you my thoughts on all this too if you want to reach me offline. But I think in your application, if you just gave them those, hey, if you got $500 in the state, are you just doing something next to the state right away or something? Then you've got a permit. But if you have substantial work in there, you're looking at years. I mean, 18 months would be fast to get that peer approved.
So we have looked into this substantially. We had a whole committee on this, discussing this. And the feedback that I got from the capital side and from traffic encroachments was that it's not that easy to kind of give that type of information and to receive it back. We could do that, but there's still no guarantee. They would have to, I don't know, they would have to look at it and see. And the other thing is, those where they had the thresholds before, those things have changed. So, you know, some of the like the QMAP process that they have now and the DEER review is different now than like the peer review that they had before. Thresholds. So there have been some changes that have happened in there within the last couple of years. So I don't know how easy it is, but we'll look into it some more.
Yeah. Currently, you know, if the project is more than $1 million and encroaching to the state highway more than 50%, for sure, Caltrans will provide heavily oversight. So if in that case, if the project is more than $1 million and encroaching to the state highway more than 50%, they will need to discuss with Caltrans just in case. Yeah, they need to build this into their schedule and the cost.
So we have another hand raised, and this is from Ismail Hojiapi. I hope I got that right.
Yeah, hi. PSR PDS was brought up, and of course, I'm from PID office here in Sacramento. An encroachment permit. PSR PDS is not just about funding, which is what your program is right now doing, is trying to fund a project. Projects are funded before they start the process of PSR PDS. PSR PDS was shortened version of PSR. PSR equivalent does not mean it's a PSR PDS. PSR PDS gets into details. Before the PANED, in this case, PSR PDS leaves a lot of it to next phase, so they can be, if there is a next phase to be had, which your projects most probably will require a PR, project report. And these are federal and state requirements because they are on the state highway system. And PSR PDS, for your projects, I can visualize it being somewhat abbreviated even further because of the some of the issues that you don't have to deal with, but it is a requirement. And a lot of its sections can be deleted or say not applicable, but a lot of it cannot be because you're altering the state right away and you're going to change the state right away. And the state right away cannot be changed without the proper supervision and or oversight. And all of those are federally and state required, not just the state, but federally required. You cannot, and they cannot be bypassed. Caltrans cannot be bypassed willingly even. So I just want to go, no, federal requirement, federal highway will question it because these are partly mostly federal properties. And you cannot bypass NEPA. Even if CEQA can be bypassed, NEPA cannot be bypassed. That's why you do need a PSR PDS. But it's not difficult for your projects. I do not see it to be a major issue, but it does require some time. And you do have to go through a lot of issues. There are 20 major sub issues. A lot of it don't apply to you, but some of it do for your projects. And when you say PSR equivalent, I think that's a misnomer, because at that point, you're just trying to finance it. Trying to find financing is more like a PIP for shop projects. We write PIPs in Caltrans to get shop funding before we start the initiation phase, which is the PIP phase. In other words, this is the same thing is happening with your application. You're trying to obtain funding, but once your funding has been certified and you're going to work on the state highway system, all CEQA and NEPA requirements apply. And we cannot, Caltrans even willingly cannot bypass them.
So Ismail, that is not what we're saying at all. Desiree and Trina, can you bring it back to what? So I think we're getting a little bit off track here.
Okay. Yeah, just that, you know, at no point are we trying to bypass any NEPA, CEQA, environmental, any type of requirements. This PSR equivalent is strictly just for the application to get programmed into the active transportation program after selection.
Correct, yeah. This, you know, maybe just like you said, Desiree, this one more like the project initiating report in Caltrans. Yeah, but that phase we delivered the project study report. So that's why it's being called the PSR equivalent. You know, for the encroachment permit, it's different story. Yeah, just like Laurie said, it's different story here. What we discuss here is try to get the project programmed.
We have another comment that came from David Raperta, and he said the $1 million threshold for encroachment permits and $3 million for PERs, has been superseded by the DEER/2MAP process. Cost isn't a factor anymore, only complexity.
That's absolutely correct.
Yes.
Thank you, David. And then we have another comment that came in from Guadalupe, and she's asking, can your agency apply for various project types? An example, submit one large infrastructure project, one plan, and one small infrastructure. Is it recommended to, or just one to increase selection?
You can submit as many applications as you want, but you know, it's up to you on how many that you can handle as an applicant and still submit quality applications.
Thank you. And then we have one final question from Michael Williams. And Michael, let me know if you prefer if I unmute you. He's asking, please clarify the distinction between what Caltrans staff reviews and what the panel reviewers review. Is there a difference? I'm assuming this goes back to what you were talking about, Laurie.
So I think I would say yes and no. The evaluators use our scoring rubrics, which we will post, so you'll see that. But I would say that Caltrans reviews things more from a, because most of both Desiree and Trina have experience at delivering projects. So I think they're looking at it to a certain extent from that angle too.
Yeah, constructability and deliverability, yeah.
Yes, and consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So yeah, all the things that we mentioned before in the workshop are the things that we review. So we like to look at the plans. I mean, we like to look at the application, but those particular items that we mentioned are the ones that we focus the most on, because that is what we have to, after those projects get programmed, we have to ensure that that those items get built later. Or if they change, we need to know what things are going to change. And if you don't have everything listed on there, well, we don't know what's changing. And you're essentially getting, if you receive funding, you're getting funded for the application as shown, by what you present. So we just need to know exactly what it is that you're planning to build.
Yeah, with that said, we recognize too that the applicant, they know the project best, they know the environment best. So we aren't looking at them, and if Desiree is looking at an application, she's not thinking, well, I don't know why they would do that kind of intersection there. I would do something else. That's not our role, unless it's something that's just like illegal or inappropriate. That we so we're not second guessing your project design, I guess I would say, put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
The only way we would do that is just if there wasn't enough space.
Yeah.
If you're saying that you want to add in, some bike lanes and it doesn't fit, or you have to take out parking, you're not saying that you're taking out parking, those are the types of things that we would question.
Mm-hmm. Or the non-compliance elements, we're definitely gonna ask you to change it. Yeah.
Right. And Michael actually wanted to come off mute.
Okay.
Michael?
Okay, so thank you. Those were good answers, and I sort of get it. So it seems like you guys are I guess both sets of reviewers, Caltrans and then the review panel is reviewing almost the exact same thing, except Caltrans is just looking only at constructability, and the reviewers are only looking to match the same information for the scoring purposes, for the rubric. But we really have two panels, Caltrans panel reviewing all of the same information, just looking for cohesion and consistency, and the reviewers looking for the same cohesion, same consistency, and then looking to apply that to scoring. Okay, that's fine. That makes sense, but thank you. And since I'm on and I'm going to have to leave, I'm telling you, I've said this before to you guys somewhat individually, but this department, what you guys are doing, the stuff that the collaboration regarding ATP, there's nothing else like this in my view in California state government and probably a lot of other states doing this kind of information, providing this information, this much support for applications as you guys are doing. I'm telling you, every single webinar, everything you guys put together, the ATRC website, everything you guys are doing, I just can't imagine anyone doing better. I mean, we still have questions about things, but I mean, just the fact that you guys are answering questions, the fact that you have so much information available, I'm just telling you, it's really one of the best run departments, best collaborative efforts I've seen, and this is not my first picnic in 20 plus years of working with California state government. So just want to say that kudos to all of you, all the people behind the scenes supporting and doing it, but this is the best information that comes across clear, concise, comprehensive, helpful, and you guys are super responsive. It's just, we just couldn't ask for anything better. That's just my opinion.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those kind words. We really appreciate it. I'm sure all of you guys do. Alika, do we have anything else?
We don't have any other questions that have come in and no other hands raised.
So I just wanted to wrap up with one thing that I should have said earlier when all of the Caltrans staff was talking. As a non-engineer and have looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications, I'll tell you the way I look at applications, which I would imagine a lot of the evaluators do it this way too. The first thing I do is I read the project description and the scope, and then I look at the maps. And I want to see where this project is and what it's doing, and that it's matching what I'm reading. And so we, not so much anymore, but sometimes we still get applications that it sounds like they're doing something that sounds great, but I cannot figure out what it is. And so what we always say is it doesn't have to be fancy, but just be clear. And I think that we showed you a lot of good examples of that. And same with the non-infrastructure. I'll kind of read the description and I'll look at the work plan, and I need to be able to figure out what they're doing. And so I think that is the biggest suggestion that I could give you, is just be as clear as possible, because the people reading the applications do not know your community or the project like you do. And we always recommend give it to somebody else to read, give it to your grandmother or your neighbor. And if they can't figure out what's going on, then it's not clear. You know, it should be very, very easy to see. Even a complicated project, the layman reader should be able to tell what's going on. Okay. Anybody else have anything else?
We got one more question. This one is from Lola. Do you find that including a non-infrastructure component in applications makes them more competitive?
It can. It can. Don't throw it in there just to do it. If it makes sense, then add a non-infrastructure component. But the weird thing that we saw last cycle is that more applicants did include non-infrastructure elements, but then for whatever reason, they didn't talk about it at all in their application. So they added it and then didn't discuss it. It was a little odd. We saw that a lot. So if you're going to add it, make sure that you're talking about it in your application, so you're getting the benefit out of adding that to the scope. But it can add a lot, and they're fairly low cost. So if you think that you need that, you want to build something, but you want to make sure people are using it, you need to educate them and encourage them, then yes, do that. Emily or Summer, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope. I was going to say it just depends on your project. So if it makes sense, add it. If it doesn't, if it's a standalone, do it that way.
I'm not seeing any other questions or hand raised.
Okay, so I want to thank Summer and Desiree and Emily and Trina, because you guys did an excellent job, and I personally always learn something from this workshop too, and so I think that we should continue doing this, and kudos to those of you that tuned into this workshop, because you will definitely have an advantage in your application. I'm sure that you all learned a lot too. So and we have a couple of, unfortunately, Alika usually kind of does our notes and is keeping track of our action items, but she was doing our questions today. But I know we had a couple things. I know we're going to look into the railroad some. Alika's going to connect Michael with the other people that had some good suggestions on railroads, and I can't remember anything else. Of course, we'll post this. You guys remember anything else we said we do? Okay, then our next workshop is December 17th?
Yeah.
Okay. Next workshop is December 17th. We'll be talking about guidelines again. And remember, that's when we will be talking about non-infrastructure. That I know that is going to be one of our topics at that workshop. And I can't think of anything else.
Sorry, December 15th. That was my mistake.
Okay. December 15th. So please sign up for that. And then I don't think we have anything. Our next one is probably in January, right, Alika?
Yes, the one following will be January 11th.
Okay. Okay, and we're doing a lot of virtual site visits. We're really kind of packed with those, but if you still would like a virtual site visit, let Alika know and she'll try to fit you in. And with that, thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Alika, for keeping us on track. And yep, and we will see you at the next workshop. Bye.